Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. Got a great show lined up for you today. We are going to have Mark Anthony Dyson, who is the host and author of a podcast and a blog, award-winning blog, known as The Voice of Job Seekers. And so we will share our time with Mark and do kind of a deep dive into job employment search, networking, kind of go in depth as to some tips that we can tell people that are looking for jobs currently. So please stay tuned. Mark will be joining us very, very shortly to do a deep dive into that topic. But first, just a real quick catch up on the, as you know, each and every week, we use the first few minutes of the show just to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Gulf Coast, Houston metropolitan area when it comes to financial literacy. So Monday night, I actually had a talk out at A&M Mays Business School with a group of students there for business pathfinders. And so that was a very good talk. We used the first half of that talk to just really give career tips when it comes to finance. They were able to kind of pick my brain of things that they need to think about when they're looking for jobs or when they're deciding on what their major is. In fact, that entire group, that is kind of what they're doing. They're exploring different professions and trying to see what their path is going to be in life. And so we use the first half of that talk to talk about that, and then I use the second half to talk about savings for when you are in college or even when you get out of college, building a cash reserve, a budget, a safety net. It's a really good talk there. Wednesday night, we had a retirement income planning talk. This was for University of Texas Health Science Center, University of Houston, and Houston Community College. So that was on Wednesday. And stay tuned. We have lots of stuff coming up with Houston Money Week 2019. Even though it seems like that's far away, slowly approaching each and every month. As a part of the leadership team of Houston Money Week, I encourage people, if you want to find out more about the free financial seminars that we have and educational events that we have, as we get closer to that event, you can go to HoustonMoneyWeek.org. You can put in your zip code, and you will see a list of all of the different educational workshops that we have either in your neighborhood or somewhere in Houston on different topics. So as we get closer to April of 2019, I know that seems far away, but as we get closer to April 2019, keep checking back because that is a dynamic calendar. It is not a static calendar. Each and every month as we approach more of our organizations, the nonprofits, city government, for-profit, banks working on community reinvestment, all get on board, and you'll see more and more of those events pop up on the calendar. With that, let's go ahead and maximize our time with Mark on the line here. Mark, are you there?
I am here. How are you, sir?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Not a problem. Glad to be here with you.
So I'll start the show kind of the same way. I'll share your bio with listeners so that they can get to know you just a little bit better. Now, you are the voice of job seekers, career consultant, job seeker advocate, career writer, and the founder of the award-winning blog. And is the blog the same name, The Voice of Job Seekers?
Correct.
So what you do is you help employed, unemployed, underemployed and underappreciated find jobs using job search strategies to navigate the new job market. Mark, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great.
So let's start with that. The blog, did it start out as a blog or as a podcast?
It started out as a blog.
So let's start
and
there.
Then evolved.
Why did you start the Voice of Job Seekers?
I actually started another blog, and I started writing resumes, but I found that there was much more to say than tell someone how to write a resume. And, of course, I could do both, and I was doing both, but I heard something kind of unique, I thought, and there were people who were coming to the blog who thought it was a unique approach. And somebody said, "Thank you for being the voice of job seekers." I said, "Oh, that's an idea." So that's what I stuck with and been with it for 7 years now.
7 years. So that is I know people when they are looking, any resource that's out there, and so I would point people that are currently looking, the website thevoiceofjobseekers.com, that there's the podcast, you've got video on there as well. Can you start by maybe sharing a few of your best tips for people who are currently looking for work?
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that that people need to really get used to if they want to toggle between economies and decade changes is to start staying engaged into the job search. We have a very bad habit of disengaging once we get a job or once we get an opportunity. Then we think that by keeping our heads down, that magically we're going to be able to navigate the job hemisphere, if you will, and we'll be okay when the opposite is truth and nothing could be further. I think what has happened is if we didn't learn anything from the Great Recession, we should have learned that it takes time to find a job. Nobody likes job search. Nobody likes the process of job search, but it's something that you're going to have to do. But, most people don't have 6, 9 months, a year or longer to find a job if they want to keep a stable economy as far as them personally. So it's better to just stay engaged. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be tied to every opportunity, nor you have to kind of navigate the job boards every day or every week or even every month. And in fact, if you're building it right, there's a lot of things that could be in place in your favor that could make it a little bit easier for you to navigate the job search scape no matter what the economy is.
So that's strong. They're staying engaged when they're looking for the job. I know, as some of the things that you mentioned, that it can take time to find a job or to do the job search. And so that I imagine at some point, if they're under the gun and they have finances and they have to pay their bills, that you've got kind of this clock ticking there. Other than staying engaged, what other things should somebody who is looking for a job be aware of?
Well, I think networking is really a huge component of staying engaged and of the job search in general. There's statistics, all kinds of statistics out there showing that, up to 70% of job seekers find their next opportunities through somebody referring them, or at least somebody giving them a lead, and that way they can get somewhat directly to the hiring manager. And people have built equity with the companies that they're with and who act as the referrers are trusted or interested in finding somebody that would be a fit for the job. And the fit could mean a lot of different things. It could mean personality, it could mean skill set, it could mean or either a soft or hard skill set. But in either way, you had that trust, and you coming in and say, oh, we like Chris, so we're going to like Mark too. And often that is the case. So they end up getting at least an interview and getting a shot at having that opportunity. So that networking has a lot of different components as well. But in general, that's where people should start really building a generation source of leads, so to speak, is through who they know and who they know that knows them and what they can do.
I love that because it's true. If you think back of the jobs that you've had over your lifetime, how many of those actually came through somebody you knew, through word of mouth? You talked about, kind of getting directly through to that hiring manager and them being incented, your friend or being incented to find a match, whether it's through skills or through personality type, and that definitely helps, get you to the head of the line there, as opposed to just getting to that end goal of having an interview. Let's talk a little bit about something you mentioned earlier, resumes. It's been so long since I've had to, as an independent business owner, I haven't looked back at my resume in a long time, but I know it's a different day and age. What should current job seekers be aware of when it comes to putting together a resume?
Well, the anatomy of a resume really, the emphasis has changed. Instead of what you've done to what you can deliver. If your resume is not full of results and accomplishments and they're not quantified with results that are directed towards what the hiring manager or the company needs, then you're kind of falling behind the times. We used to be able to just apply a resume in general, and that would be that, and we used to be able to get calls, at least have some success. When now, since we have what they call the applicant tracking system, which looks for keywords, if you're doing it through a job board, then, of course, that's going to get scanned, and if you don't match the employer's scores or expectations through those keywords, you're not likely to get a call back from a job. In fact, you probably will never hear about it again. That's why your resume, they call it often the black hole. But your resume has to be a match for that employer. So back in the day, whenever that was, you wrote it generally. Now you want to customize your resume towards that job description so that you can have a better match for those keywords. So they'll be interested in how well you match based on those keywords. And unfortunately, they may not even touch a human's hand until they've gone through the whole process. As to before, it was hand to mouth, one by one, and you actually saw a human, but eventually employers became more efficient and uses this ATS software to basically exclude the ones that they don't want, not necessarily to try to include the ones that they want.
So that's important because I'm dating myself here, but I remember typing resumes and faxes were just coming along and faxing them there to the employer. But nowadays, you mentioned this app search, where they're particularly looking for keywords that are matching to the position. So in the past, where I would write maybe just a general resume, and that would go out to all the different employers that I was looking to get hired there, you're saying that they need to really tweak and tune that resume to speak to the position, the individual position that they're going after.
Yeah, I mean, resume writers will argue amongst themselves about how much tweaking needs to be done. But if you're really engaged, and you're really engaged through your network, that intel will come through your network, especially if they're in the same industry you are. So you'll not just hear the lingo, but you'll hear how the lingo applies, and you'll take that information, you'll ask yourself, how does that apply to me, and what I've done. And that will give you enough intel to also make that a pretty good match. In fact, that intel might be more of a real-life information that is usable, because very often job descriptions become very vague and useless sometimes, because they're just going by what they've had the past 10 years, when really the position always evolves with each person. So the job description should be rewritten, every few years. But outside of that, you have to kind of, if you're connected with your network can alert you to how that job is changing, what they're doing.
Talk to me a little bit about interviewing, the whole interviewing process. So let's say you put your resume in, and you do get that call back, and they say, well, come in, we want to speak to you for an interview. If it's somebody who hasn't gone on an interview for years, can you share with us some of the things that they need to be thinking about?
Okay, well, some of the things that they need to know, there are many positions where you will be interviewed by phone first, or via Skype, or you may be interviewed by both a person over the phone and then a Skype interview, and then possibly even have an assessment to do online, which could be one of many things. It could be a behavioral assessments, which are very common. Depending on what type of position, it may be a software position where maybe it might be a Microsoft Office, for instance. You may need to do that online. They want to see how well you're able to navigate documents. So you might have that assessment before you even see a person. So that's one of the major things that people have to be ready for, the interview. The other one is that you may not interview with just one person at one time. It may not be a one-on-one. That first interview could be a panel interview if you should pass the first phase of it. And that panel interview could be 2 to 5 to 6 people, which back in the day you didn't practice so much interview skills. Some people did. But these days you want to practice if you have not been in an interview in 6 months or more. The interviewing is hard, and you've got to be able to kind of change and be agile enough to kind of address each person's questions, be able to look that person in the eye, address, kind of know what the person's name and what they do, which could be kind of tough. And, hopefully you're taking notes as well. And that should be one of the things should be your notes, so that Chris does this, Mark does this, and you direct it towards that person amongst the other people, especially if it's something specific when you start to ask questions back. So, those are two of the bigger parts of interviewing, how much that's changed and how much preparation a job seeker has to be ready to engage in that way.
So I think that's powerful what you just said, the idea of before you even sit down with a person or a panel or a group of people, nowadays you might have to do a phone interview for the job. You might have to do a Skype interview. You might have to do a combination of both of those. It's not unusual for them to send you an assessment online, whether that's like a DISC test, like a behavioral test, or something that just doing with software proficiency, whether it's like a Excel or Office. How proficient are you at the skills that might be used for the job? But then you also said that when you do meet for the live interview, that it may not be just the one-on-one. It may be the panel. It may be a group of people. You suggested that people practice. If it's been a while since you sat down for an interview, going through those questions, what you think they're going to be asking, you suggested taking notes and asking questions yourself and really preparing for the interview. So I think that's all really good stuff, good tips for people who haven't had to go through that process in a while. Or people who they're brand new to it, and so this is the time to do that. What would you tell listeners who, there's all kinds of advice out there. You might read something online or hear it from other people. What would you like job seekers to know about reading or hearing job advice?
Well, I think you want to try to read the most current trends of what's going on as far as interviewing and writing resumes and just preparing for the next opportunity, even if you're working. Reading a blog from 2011 and that has last posted in 2011, probably there's some probable sound advice that is given back then, and there's advice that applies still. And I don't want to make it sound all bad, but it helps to connect with people who are currently writing about the space, who are practicing in the space, and kind of know what's going on with the trend, because you want to be aware of how things are materializing in the job space. Now, 2011, you don't hear anything about how, and not that it's important just yet, but it's starting to happen with the use of artificial intelligence, where that there's automation added to the process. And so if, an artificial intelligence is used as part of the applicant tracking systems we talked about, but there's other ways that companies begin to use it, you should at least be aware of what it does right now and start to keep up and how it will look in the future. You don't have to worry about it too much as a critical point right now, but those are kind of things you want to kind of be aware of, is how, you're going to be vetted and what that's going to look like and how you should be prepared. And that makes all the difference in the world when it comes to being ready to say that you're a relevant piece of the team and you're trying to sell someone on that, but you're not caught up with the technology. And if you're not caught up with the technology, a year is quite a ways to be out of the pocket these days as far as knowing what that industry is going to want and desire out of you. So, those things can make a difference so you want to start to read and find out and see who's referring to who and who are kind of some of the thought leaders. But you can't go wrong with some of the sites that are out there already that are doing, getting great information, like Glassdoor.com. You want to get into Payscale.com because you want to know what the employer is, or what the industry says what you should be paid. Salary.com. Those are three sites we did a great place for you to start to get the latest information. And from there, of course, you can extend into even some of the personal blogs like the Voice of Job Seekers and a lot of the others that are out there that give great information and relevant to your job search, at least in general.
So we're speaking with Mark Anthony Dyson. He's the creator of the multiple award-winning blog and podcast, The Voice of Job Seekers. We just talked about some of the advice that's out there, things that you read about keeping current. You talked a little bit about AI or the automated intelligence, really, in the kind of the future of job seeking there. Let's go a little bit further with that in the sense of things that weren't around in the past. How big is social media? If you think about like LinkedIn and Facebook and that sort of thing, does that play a role in a job search?
These days, if you don't have a social presence, a social online presence, you may not exist to that employer, because your competition is likely putting on their resume even the URL of their LinkedIn profile, where the employer can go and look and read more about the potential employee and get to know them. And a lot of it is, you have to think in terms of being competitive. Your competitors using Twitter and LinkedIn and showing somewhat of what we call this word online brands, as opposed to just having kept your head down all the time and not knowing what's relevant. Because it's not just the fact that you have one, it is kind of that someone has one and you don't is a competitive edge for them. But also the employer is interested in you showing a positive version of themselves online as well. So the employer likely has an online brand with content and things that they're saying about the employees, and the employees many times, in some cases, are returning that to online about the employer. So you have that handshake not only in person, but also online. But generally, the reference checks include finding out who are you, and that's the way that you're going to exist these days in the job market, is having an online presence.
Talk a little bit about, you mentioned some of the resources that are out there, that Glassdoor, PayScale, both of those, salary.com or salaries.com. That leads me to a question about negotiating. So let's say that you did get the job, you got the call back on the interview, you went in for the interview. They're at a point where they're going to offer you the position. What's the etiquette when we start talking about money? What's the etiquette for approaching that?
Great question, because really it's in this economy and economies going forward, negotiating is going to be the norm. And before you even start your job search, you have to also, as a part of your researching companies and where you want to interview and who you want to interview with, hopefully you're doing that instead of being a slave to the rhythm. That you're interviewing and you're thinking about what your salary needs are. And you want to research even by as close as what is going on in your city, in your region. And certainly Glassdoor and PayScale and Salary.com are good places to start, and it doesn't have to be the only place that you would do that research. But you want to go into the job search process with a really good idea of what you should be getting. And most people back in the day, they'll focus on just the number of the salary, when really it's now the whole total compensation package that you've got to look at. And in most cases, in many cases, you'll be able to negotiate that to get a better salary or to position yourself better economically, either whether it's through the actual salary, what you'll get paid weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, to how you position other parts of your package, like your insurance, like other parts that are just relevant to the employer and to you as your approach. But likely you're going to negotiate that on the back end. The first couple of times you get to talk to an employer, of course, you are going to have, you're really going to focus in on what value you bring, not so much how much money you're going to make from it.
So I love that. So focusing at the beginning on what you're bringing to the table and the value that you're bringing, and then eventually you'll get around to the discussion of salary, and those who ask get and those who don't. You also talked about the benefits and kind of this, what might be soft dollars, but we know in this economy, health insurance, a matching retirement account, all of that stuff is huge.
Yes, vacation time is big. As well, having that time off. You may have left a couple of weeks of vacation on the table from your last job, but you're coming into a job where you may not get vacation for the first 90 days. You might be able to negotiate getting that extra 2 weeks somewhere in that 90 days. But a lot of it's all in your approach and the perceived value, and of course the way that you respect the employer and their time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.